Now, I'd like to make something perfectly clear here before getting into this. I don't love Batman.
God damn it, you're on thin ice, pal.
I don't hate him, but I don't love his works like I do most superhero projects. Though, let's be honest, what is there to enjoy these days?
It's funny because it's true.
You see, for me, the Batman is a concept I associate with the likes of the Matrix and Avatar movies. I can see the appeal, and I'd never take them away from anyone, but I'd also never stand in line for them.
Let him finish.
The Batman has always been one of those notable names and personalities that has just been there, simmering away in the background of my existence, actualised as either a movie, show, comic, game, tattoo, action figure, or even pasta. And despite the continued presence he has, he's never struck me as anything to engage with. I can see the appeal, and generally the design is good, but I've never been able to invest in him, and generally denied his existence in most cases whenever he's brought up. But what I cannot deny though, despite my lack of interest, is the legacy that he has is unlike any other superhero. Even with the mixed strength of fan bases behind the likes of Miles Morales, Peter Parker, Iron Man, Captain America, Superman, Green Lantern, and even Wonder Woman.
I see your point.
He's always had a polarising presence within media over the decades, generating a swell of fans or naysayers as each year goes by, where some find him to be an indelible stain on the comic book history that will never die, and others feel that he is the pinnacle of superhero storytelling for being little more than an ordinary dude in a gimmicky costume. Filled with emotional complexities and nuances to his character, stacked with a hefty amount of memeable moments and an abundance of relatable / desirable capabilities that he possesses, have left him so recognisable that even a dementia patient could point him out.
Oh no, he's got a point.
But despite the praise and admiration for such an icon, Warner Brothers sure know how to fuck him up by constantly misusing him and forcing him into unrealistic situations and battle sequences that never look natural for a character whose alias is the Dark Knight, and who literally belongs in a city fighting crime among the shadows. But as the great Darth Maul once said,
If at first you don't succeed,
Hey,
try again!
a motto of which appears to be their business model at this point, where after notable performances from Ben Affleck over the years, who looked steadily more bored and pissed off as time went by, having been completely screwed around with over his direction in all this, and given the promise of a solo Batman project one day, to drive home how good his version might have possibly been, the poor bastard had that snatched away from him. When the higher-ups looked at the diminishing returns and unfavourable comments toward their steady flow of shittiness, and they thought, screw this, we fucking broke it. And now it's onto the thought of let's see what James Gunn can do instead.
you're getting mugged, kid.
No, you're getting mugged.
How the hell does that even work?
And while not directly connected to Gunn, this line of thinking is how we wound up here, gazing upon the latest entry from the Caped Crusader, who has a spotty history in cinema at best, with mixed reactions to classic titles such as Batman Forever and Batman and Robin, would then become a swell of positivity following Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight that is heralded as the greatest of all time.
You're goddamn right.
Is now battling for its spot on the mountaintop following this. Matt Reeves' 2022 addition to the Dead Legacy, titled The Batman, starring everyone's favourite nighttime dweller Edward Cullen and Triss's friend from the Divergent franchise.
Comedy.
This movie became the 7th highest grossing picture last year for Hollywood and is revered by many for its grounded storytelling, paced delivery, cinematic presentation and intense gritty stylization. That has since become the topic of conversation or controversy for many when the question arose of whether it was enough to dethrone Nolan's Dark Knight as the greatest creative endeavour that uses the bat. Well, on that I can't give you an answer, as unashamedly I haven't sat down to watch The Dark Knight, and nor do I intend to anytime soon, as I'm one of those pricks who jumps off the bandwagon and waits for it to settle, then proceeds to talk about it when it's no longer cool anymore. And given we're 15 years removed from it and everyone still wants to shut up about it, I figured I've got time. But regarding this one, what I can tell you is that while this wasn't everything I assumed it would be based on fan reception, and that bar is pretty low, it was certainly something impressive. Now, as I said at the start, I don't have much to go off when it comes to a frame of reference for the Batman, let alone DC. Given I spend more of my time giving my soul away to Marvel, praying for a better day at this point, means that I've never thought to put much into other franchises or projects, meaning I can only judge this movie on its own merits and faults, so you're unlikely to get a deep breakdown of events or characters from this, but here's what I can tell you. I had a pretty good time with this movie.
Oh, thank goodness.
goodness!
It did challenge my ADHD considerably with almost a 3-hour runtime that I did feel the minutes of occasionally, and in fairness was something I struggled with in Endgame, so don't come after me on that, but despite my limitations, it was a challenging, thought-provoking, brooding, atmospheric and engaging venture, where when I was engaged with it, it worked, and when I wasn't, it didn't. But truthfully, one irrefutable fact to this entry is that it is a visual spectacle for the ages, with a hard-on for framing and imagery that evokes panels you'd see straight out of a Batman comic.
And I gotta tell you, it was perfect. Perfect.
Now as for a synopsis, and I'll keep this brief because let's be honest, everyone's probably seen this at this point, this movie settles on Bruce Wayne in his early years, steadily growing a reputation for himself as a credible antagonist to his antagonists, and while his efforts are noticeable, Gotham's crime rate is far beyond what he can tackle alone. But after the death of the city's mayor, the Bat is thrown face first into what will become a rather personal revelation for him, and as he eventually teams with Selina Kyle, who is investigating the disappearance of her own friend that becomes interwoven with Bruce's investigation into the seedy underbelly of Gotham, the pair start to uncover corruption within the city that is nestled within all positions of power.
Well, that's fucking not good.
Including the stark realization that Bruce's own family are involved with part of the problem, and this all comes back to the Riddler. And the twist in this comes when we find out that the Riddler was neglected and abandoned by society in his youth, and became embittered with the wealthy especially. So this became a personal vendetta for him, as he took it upon himself to rid Gotham of its power players and assassinated many of them throughout this, including an attempt on Bruce in place of his father Thomas, for his dirty dealings when he attempted to become mayor before, who was implicated in the murder of a reporter that he never asked for, who was threatening to expose the truth over Martha Wayne's time in a mental institution that could have ruined his chances. And by the end, the Riddler chooses to give himself up to act as a martyr and spread the word that people need to act and expose the injustices in Gotham, which he doubles down on by detonating explosives around the city walls to flood it in an attempt to clear the impurities. And the movie ends with Riddler explaining that he felt inspired by the Bat's methods for handling justice, but Bruce states that they are not the same and rushes in to stop the assassination of the latest mayor along with Selina, where both nearly meet their makers until they save one another, and the movie ends with Bruce wishing to inspire hope in the city once more, while Selina deems it a lost cause. Now, when unpacking this movie, I said before that my knowledge is limited when it comes to the characters and any context for them, but from what I witnessed in this, there is a lot to appreciate regarding the film's direction, screenplay, narrative, lack of slow motion,
I understood that reference.
realistic opponents, and actual detective work, which I understand is a gripe about previous Batman movies seeming to forget. And impressively, the fact that they managed to make a compelling piece of cinema that's centered around a man who's still figuring out his goth years and trying to make it his whole fucking personality, in a manner that seems plausible as well.
I'm vengeance.
I think it's fair to say that The Batman genuinely impressed me, showing a competent integration of both the crime, thriller and superhero genres that worked in tandem to produce a foreboding, tense, realistic and nearly horrifying experience based on certain shots and presentations of the Bat himself. Everyone felt decently defined in this, full of history and had a story to tell. The drama hit heavy, the world felt lived in, the dialogue was informative, and overall this was a delight on your eyes, with compositions that convey meaning about a character, not simply because an angle looked edgy or seemed inventive, but because it told us something and was done with intention. Much of the exposition in this especially had an aggression and weight behind it that hooked me, but above that, each actor and actress filled their roles out excellently, feeling almost effortless in some cases, but of the entire cast, the one saddled with the biggest expectation to execute his role with precision was Robert Pattinson.
You gotta be kidding me.
A man who's done just about everything he can at this point to convince people that he's more than a typecast, and with this was determined to shed the sparkles for blood, embracing a different moody tone to his version of the Bat, and from what I saw, he did a decent job. His execution of the Bat specifically was done brilliantly in my mind, with a cold stoicism that is filled with regret and trauma and that wants to unload but won't cross that line, deeming so much of a beatdown the vengeance necessary to convince his enemies to try that again apparently.
I think you got him.
You want what he's having?
No.
That's what I thought. Justice for Gotham.
Pattinson's interpretation of the Bat/Bruce felt appropriate for the age he is and the length of time that he's been operating as a vigilante. He was unyielding, stubborn, and at times obsessed with his objectives, trying to uncover these cryptic messages, whilst attempting to protect his allies and fend off the relentless brutality of Gotham. But the genius to this portrayal of him is that we see him flawed, unpolished, unrefined, and nearly sluggish at times with the weight over him. He's still establishing dominance over the city, and from my understanding, the Batman is almost always always presented as competent, composed, and cautious in his movies. So to see this version of the Bat feel almost reckless at times, but was equally crafty in his efforts and was respectively intelligent, did wonders for this. He was never written to be anything more than he should be, which makes for an immersive experience as you're working things out alongside him, and it works to produce a believable Batman. An individual who is intelligent but not without struggle, he's strong but not without weakness, and he's skilled but not without fault, leaving this portrayal of him as the most believable, realistic, and unrefined iteration.
Good job.
And the world building and set design did a lot to tell us about his mental state too, showing us how he lives out of a messy, discarded base underneath an unkept home and physically looks like he's on the verge of tapping out constantly, being made what he is by the inner corruption of his own city and, as it turns out, his own family. And possibly my favourite aspect about the Batman in this is how they tailored everything about him to appear enigmatic and almost unrecognisable, where his presence at times would make even a ghost shit itself. The very notion and visual of the Batman being presented as almost a horror character in the opening minutes really set this apart from what I've seen of other installments too. The only drawback of this portrayal is when Pattinson has to be Bruce. The performance feels weak and unconcerned, and I never get the same sense of dread or emotion from this side of the character as I do when he's the Bat. And what's odd is when we see Bruce, he's supposed to be the exposed side to him. It's an opportunity to see under the cowl and truly understand how this man ticks. But at times, it felt like a lot of that was left to the vigilante, and while I enjoyed that, the Bruce Wayne for this wasn't what I assumed it would be based on how many people around me were talking about it. Now, as for the plot and its lead villain, I felt things were crafted rather decently here, offering audiences a more intense and coordinated affair that's packed with nuance and delivers on the crazed nature a lot of the Batman villains tend to possess, by leaning into the uncomfortable side to a lot of the killings that superhero movies tend to overlook. But in each of the Riddler's killings here, there's a motivation, logic, and cause behind it that advances the plot and everything around it. Nothing is senseless or unnecessarily brutal. Each loss in this film is a physical representation of his inner turmoil and anguish from his youth, and the manner in which this plot was written and orchestrated worked excellently to propel Riddler into the upper echelon of calculated villains from the superhero genre, who upon a couple of viewings you'd no doubt be able to run a deep analysis over. But from my singular viewing of this, I of course wouldn't condone anything he did, but I can understand his logic. And while he's a deluded mind to many, in his world he's right, and though his actions are twisted, who's to say that what he's doing isn't that far removed from what Bruce does? The only distinguishable aspect on face value is that Bruce restrains himself from making a killing blow, but I'd still say that he's morally ambiguous and often never goes far enough to stop his enemies returning. But that aspect is what makes him so compelling to many, and a stark contrast to other anti-heroes like the Punisher, who will often cross that line. And what's brilliant about this one too is how the Riddler's rampage starts to turn Bruce's head. A man plagued with devotion to something greater than himself is steadily shown more of the city's corruption and imbalance, where each reveal informs him of the greater problem Gotham has, and how in reality there might not actually be any heroes or villains at all, as everyone is in it for themselves and acting on their own interests, including the Bat. And you start to question whether the Riddler was right or not, and one could argue that his brutality throughout this isn't simply a reflection of his inner pain, but maybe him actualizing his perception of the damage these people have done, and that really he sees himself and the Bat as equalizers. So how is what they are doing any different to the likes of the Mayor and the gangs?
Of course.
This movie does an excellent job at assessing the imbalances of society too, between the impoverished and wealthy, and how no one ever truly has a greater interest beyond their own in mind 9 times out of 10, and it's handled in a mature, rational and engaging way rather than senselessly spouting off talking points that are egregiously one-sided. The Batman is performed with direction and energy that casts a light on the grim undertone that DC is known for almost perfectly, and it feels like Matt Reeves and the writing team truly understood who Batman is and how he acts, but to strip his story back to his formative years as it were in the cowl, made for a refreshing take on a legacy character, one that based on fan reception was exactly what they wanted. And while Robert Pattinson would probably never have been anyone's first choice for the role, he delivers a compelling and thoughtful performance that removes the campy nature we've known from previous Batman entries, and instead grounds us with actual detective work and charged progression. But to be perfectly honest, of everything in this, the cinematography was possibly what I appreciated the most from this. The lighting, compositions, and odd vibrancy to Gotham made this feel distinct and noticeable. The city itself was believable and self-contained, with the design of it making it feel like it has a heart and soul. I was always told before that Gotham is simply New York, just renamed, with a lot of imagery shown to me doing little to separate it from that association. But here the choices made animated landscape and architecture did wonders to cast Gotham as its own entity, like something you don't want to live in, and the style of it helps to reinforce that idea that it is possibly a city beyond saving, that it's simply a death trap waiting to engulf you. But the last thing I really have to mention here was the casting. I've talked at great length about Pattinson, but as for his co-star, Zoe Kravitz did a superb job in the role of Catwoman. She was quite possibly the epitome of a strong female protagonist that you can actually believe in these days. She was intelligent, capable, seductive, and could wipe the floor with the best of them, but she was never written to overshadow the titled hero of this, nor become one of the latest girl bosses that would generate a swell of backlash. She was written to slot into that healthy middle that you could actually appreciate.
Good job.
Paul Dano was new to me as the psychotic Riddler, and we never saw much of him outside the mask, so I can't offer anything towards this in that regard, but he was decent enough. Colin Farrell as the Penguin was a bizarre one for me, but the man has talent and it's shone through here, and Jeffrey Wright did a respectable job as Gordon, but again, I don't have much reference for how he should be. And lastly, based on my awareness of who Alfred is, Andy Serkis, much like Pattinson, would not have been my first choice for what is supposed to be an elderly father figure, a moral compass to Bruce, but the name value was likely the strongest reasoning behind this. As for everything else though, the musical choices for this were fantastic, with the Bats theme becoming a noticeable soundtrack thanks to TikTok, and the choices with this made for a remarkable feat in superhero storytelling, that following it has become a demand from fans and general audiences alike as a new form of superhero content that people want more of.
I want more. And I know I shouldn't.
But what would possibly be my biggest complaint with this title is the length, and how it allows for too much time on the menial stuff like Bruce having to piece together clues at an alarmingly slow pace. I can appreciate what they intended to do with this iteration of the character when proposing a runtime of this magnitude, as it gives the audiences time to adjust to the latest face of DC's Mount Rushmore, but like I said earlier, I felt every minute of this time. I would argue as well that there's a degree of self-indulgence when you offer a movie at this length, as while it could inform us of much about the characters, there are elements that you can certainly leave on the cutting room floor. So in my mind, if you're going to do something at this length, you need to justify it, and honestly, I don't see how the plot for this was stretched as far as it was, as it did feel like it meandered at times, and the effect of this was that I was starting to forget characters and certain plot aspects as it went by, that I had to pause in the third act just to remind myself of what had happened and who did what. And what's worse is that despite the slog of a runtime, there's no catharsis or definitive conclusion for what was building up to become the strongest showing from a legacy title. However, that aside, I did have a good time with this. The Batman is guilty of a few loose ends and overindulgences, but it has to be one of the more confident showings from this genre that I've seen for some time. And that leaves me to say that while the Batman is not my go-to hero or anyone that I felt compelled to invest in throughout my life, I'm glad that I put the time in to check this one out, as it's honestly worth the hours to at least see what the fuss is about. Anyway though, that's all I've got for this week. Thank you so much for stopping by. If you liked what you saw here, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe for more reviews like this down the road, and until next time everyone, take care, and I'll catch you later.